Welcome back to the Return to the Queen podcast. My name is Nina, and I am your host. And with me, I have Joe Moreaux of Return of the King podcast, which I am also a host of. And we are here today to talk about two very important topics, which pertain to Joe's health, because he has had a very crazy, turbulent time the past couple months in regard to his health, and we wanted to give everyone an update on that and tell everybody what exactly happened. And then we are also going to be discussing Joe's conversion story, which is epic. So I just want to reintroduce Joe, who everyone already knows. Hi, Joe.
Hello, goddaughter Janina. How are you doing?
I am great. You're not allowed to call me that. But also, I just want to say up front that in the comments, usually we get told that our intro is the best on Catholic YouTube. And I'm just going to say that I have to agree.
I was, all of you couldn't see me, but I was headbanging in the background as it was playing. I was having a lot of fun with that. It's very epic for sure. I like it.
It is. Well, Joe, it's like the first time I've gotten to talk to you since before you had a stroke. Joe here had a stroke back in December, and I really wanted to get him on. It's really bad, but like probably it wasn't like one of the first things I said to him. But after like a week, I was like, "Hey, Joe, can I get you on to talk about your experience in the hospital?"
So I just come home from the hospital.
Yeah. Right. But he's here with us now, and Joe, everybody wants to hear what happened. And I remember, just as a quick, forethought, that I had received the news from Carol Ann. Was it December 22nd or the 21st?
Yeah, I went in on the 21st in the evening. The whole full day was the 22nd. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So it was the 21st. I remember that was just a hard night for me. And then all of a sudden I got this text from Carol Ann, and she was like, "Hey, please pray for Joe. We think he's having a stroke." And I was like, just everything froze for me. And I was like, "Are you kidding me?" And I remember I was so upset by the news, and my whole family prayed for you. So Joe, tell us a little bit about that.
Well, yeah, so it was a crazy experience. I mean, I've never had a stroke before, so I didn't know what signs to look for when having a stroke. I didn't know what was going on with me. But December 21st was a Thursday, and it was just a normal day. I worked. I was at my basic job working, and I was working from home that day, which I'm very thankful for. But it was basically like 4:00 p.m. rolled around, and I had signed out of work, said bye to my team. It happened so suddenly. I basically said I signed out. I stood up from my desk, and when I stood up, everything felt very, very dizzy. Everything just seemed very I don't know how to describe it, just wobbly, dizzy. And I didn't know what was going on. And I thought at first, I'm sure this will go away in a few seconds or in a minute or two. And then came on this horrendous headache. Don't know how to describe it other than just a horrible migraine as if someone's kind of hitting the side of your head with a hammer. It was bad. And again, I kind of thought, well, I'm sure this is going to go away in a few minutes. I didn't know what was happening initially. It was just very strange. And it happens just all out of nowhere. I actually initially walked outside, and it sounds like the dumbest thing, but I thought, well, I'm going to smoke a cigarette. So I'm smoking a cigarette while this thing's happening and thinking like it'll go away in a few minutes. And then I tried sending a text message to someone. I believe it was my dad. I was trying to text somebody. This is when I first realized something was weird, because when I grabbed my cell phone with my right hand, it was like the cell phone was so heavy all of a sudden. Like I couldn't like this, like just text like this, it was like weighing me down to try to hold this cell phone. And so I had to put the cell phone on top of my car so I could like just type on it, because I couldn't support it. It was the craziest thing. And as I'm texting, in my mind, I know what letters I want to type, but what was coming out was just all this gibberish. Like it was like I don't know how to explain it. It was like my brain and my body was disconnected. Because in my head I'm thinking like, no, yeah, like I'm trying to type out this sentence, but what I'm seeing is a bunch of letters and symbols, and it was weird. And so then I thought, forget it, I'll text later. So I put the phone back in my pocket, walked back inside, went to my room where Carol Ann was laying down reading a book. So she's reading this book, so she's not looking at me as I walk in the room. And I just said, babe, I'm feeling very dizzy. I said, and a bad headache. I said, something doesn't feel right. And without looking at me, she just says, well, that's because I always tell you not to smoke and not to eat bad. And, but you choose to do both. And I was like, I'm like, yeah, that's true. I said, I'm going to try to take a nap because my head's hurting. So I laid down next to her and was trying to fall asleep, but the headache was just getting worse and worse. I mean, I couldn't sleep. It was really bad. So then I kind of jumped off the bed and I said, you know what? I'm going to try to take a shower. And she said, okay. Well, this is when I really started to realize something was off, because I walked in the shower and my right hand, when I went to turn the nozzle to adjust the water temperature, I couldn't turn the nozzle. It again, I wish I knew a better way to explain it, unless you've experienced it yourself, but it was like my left hand turned the hot water on easy. My right hand with the cold water couldn't move the handle whatsoever. Like it wouldn't move.
Wow.
So yeah, I had to use my left hand to turn it, like, the simplest action, right? Just like just turn the knob, but I couldn't do it. I'm in the shower for a few minutes, and then the dizziness is not going away. In fact, it's getting worse. The headache's getting worse. I come out, and it's where I looked in the mirror and I thought, why do things seem so, like everything just seems really off? So I go back in the room, I'm getting ready, and this is when I started talking to Carol Ann. I don't remember exactly what I was saying, but she said, why do you sound like you're drunk? Like you're fumbling over all your words. And again, the weird thing is, in my brain,
Did you notice that?
No, that's the weird thing. In my brain, I knew what I was trying to say, and I thought I was saying it clearly. I'll say this: I could tell that I was trying to make an effort to say it clearly. So I know what she means. I was trying to make an effort to sound normal. Which normally when you talk, like right now, you don't need to make an effort. You're just talking. But I was like trying to avoid slurring. So I do see in that sense what she was saying. But I basically just, she said, you sound like you're drunk. And then she looked up at me, and this is when she said, why is your face drooping? Why do I see your face starting to droop a little bit? And that was nerve-wracking. So she yelled for her mom, who came in the room, because we live with my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law came in the room and looked at me, and she said, Joe, what's wrong with your face? Again, I didn't know what was happening. It wasn't like I thought, oh, I'm having a stroke, because I'd never had one in my life. So I didn't know what was happening. All I knew at that point is I started to feel my body shut down. I could feel, I'm literally, like, the way I could say it, this is my body, my leg, my arm, everything just started to shut down. I was feeling numbness hit my whole body. And it was a scary feeling, because now what started to happen was the headache got so bad, I was seeing flashes and spots, black, white, yellow, just everything around me was just flashing, almost like a strobe light right in front of my face, And Caroline said, do you need to go to the hospital? And I said, yeah, I think I need to go to the hospital. The hard thing is that we had tested positive for COVID earlier that week. If you remember, we had both tested positive. So
yeah,
Carol Ann thought, well, I can't take you. She couldn't take me because she said she hadn't tested negative yet. We were going to do a follow-up test that following day, but we hadn't taken it yet. So they're not going to let me in, so she asked her mom, can you take Joe to the hospital? So Alicia's getting ready really quick. And I'm sitting there thinking, man, I'm going to die. This is the best way I can say I thought I was dying, because I literally, at that point, I felt my body shutting down and I was seeing the flashes. I know what was happening. I just thought any moment now I'm dying. So I told Caroline I had to literally grab her arms and put her close to me and said, babe, if this is the last time I see you in this life, I want you to know how much I love you. I never deserved you as a wife. You've given me such a great life, and I'm blessed, and I started saying these things to her, and she just started crying. Why are you saying this right now? Why are you telling me this right now? I said, because I don't know I don't know what's happening to me. I don't know if I'm dying. And I just need you to know these things. It was very emotional, to say the least, very emotional. I thought that might be the last time I get to see her in this life. And I went to my mother-in-law's car, My mother-in-law is like, speeding to get me to the hospital. As we're in the car, the spots increased so much that now I was starting to, like, people say you fade into blackness. I tell people it's really fading into whiteness. I was seeing like white, like just blind me. Everything go white, and then I would see, the dashboard, the road, and then it would start going white again. Then we'd go, I kept doing that. My body continued to feel like it was just getting more and more numb to where I couldn't feel my body. I was just like in the car, like slung over, and I kept falling asleep. My mother-in-law kept like shaking me, wake up, Joe, wake up. And I would, start like I would wake up startled. She said, don't fall asleep. Keep talking to me. And I don't remember much about the car ride other than that part of it. I don't remember what we were talking about. I know when we got to the hospital, my mother-in-law got out of the driver's side. Well, I used my left arm to try to open up the passenger side. And when I did, I basically just fell out of the car. I couldn't get myself up. And again, I know I keep saying this, but just so people understand, the strangest thing to me was that my brain felt normal. My brain's thinking like, come on, just stand up. Like, just, like, what are you doing? But my body is like basically telling my brain, like, well, I can't do that right now. It was the worst thing. And I do want to say this, the other important aspect about that car ride, that what I do remember on the way to the hospital is when I prayed an act of contrition, audibly prayed it out loud. I started praying the Hail Mary, and I then examined my conscience. So I remember doing this in the car ride. I remember thinking to myself, okay, I went to confession 3 weeks ago with my Monsignor. I mean, I remembered it vividly, and I thought, okay, have I committed mortal sin since those 3 weeks? And I'm like thinking about things and realized I'm not in mortal sin. So it's weird because I wasn't afraid of going to hell, I want to say, but I had a legitimate fear of I'm going to be in purgatory for a long, long time. That thought really profoundly struck me. I remember even feeling my scapular, thinking, okay, thank God I have my scapular on. I have my scapular on. I made an act of contrition. I'm not in mortal sin that I can think of. My conscience was clear, in other words. But I did have this deep reality of I'm going to be in purgatory. That's just what went through my head. I'm going to be in purgatory. And if I'm there, who's going to pray for me? Who's going to get masses offered for me? I mean, it's weird when you think you're dying, the real thoughts that come to your mind about preparing now for what you think is next, which is supposed to be judgment. I was immensely like in tune with the idea of any moment now I'm going to meet God. And this is it in my life. I thought I made it 42 years. My tombstone is going to say 1981 to 2023. This is it. This is the life. I had 42 years. I thought, man, I didn't even make it 20 years married to Carol Ann. This year was, this 2024, so this year will be our 20th. I didn't make it 20 years. All the things that went through my head. But again, I got to the hospital, fell out of the car. My mother-in-law immediately got me up onto a wheelchair, rushed me in, and the people at the window of emergency immediately saw, and my mother-in-law said, do you see his face drooping? And they said, yes, we do. They said, get him back ASAP. So, I mean, I didn't have to wait at all. I was in the hospital, and then bam, I was in the back. They were just moving me. And I remember seeing my mother-in-law, and I saw all these doctors. I'm laying down. Everything's moving so fast. And I was still fading out at this point. Every few seconds fading out. I really thought any second now was going to be the final breath. That's it. And I just had to be at peace with it. I know that once they had me in the examination room, they put they helped me onto this bed, and I was going to be doing a CT scan. I think that was the first thing, if I remember correctly. A lot of the details of those next few hours are kind of a little bit hazy to me, but they did an examination on me where I had to go into a tube. I know that. And my body was so numb that like it was falling off the side of the bed. Like I couldn't keep straight on the bed because I kept like just plopping off of it, basically. My arm, my leg, my head was just like falling to the side. So they had to Velcro me to the bed. I was all Velcroed in this big strap. So I was just like, I couldn't move. They put me in. I was in there for some time. I want to say when that ended, that initial test, which I think was about maybe 30 minutes or something like that. I remember thinking, okay, I'm not dead. I was still alive. I was breathing. And I thought, okay, I guess I'm not dying. That was the first moment when I realized I'm not dying. As up until that point, for about however long I really thought any moment I was going. And finally, I came to this peaceful idea, this peaceful acceptance of like, okay, I'm not dying. I'm still here. What does that mean for me? And I thought, well, it means whatever's happening to me, I'm paralyzed the rest of my life. You know, by that point, my parents were showing up, and because Caroline, that's when she probably texted you. She was texting everybody, my family, my close friends, Monsignor, our bishop. I mean, she was just texting as many as she could to let them know to pray for me. So my parents had shown up. They put me into a room, and this is when a doctor first explained to me, probably about an hour after the fact. The doctor told me, okay, you've had a hemorrhagic stroke. So that's when I knew what it was, at least, because up to that point, I really had no clue what was happening to me. People ask, or like I've had people ask me in the past month, well, why didn't you do this or that? And I tell people, I've never had a stroke before. All I know is that I was flashing in and out of consciousness, basically, and my body shutting down on me. That's all I know. I didn't know. So I didn't know what was happening to me. I didn't know heart attack, aneurysm. I had no clue what was happening to me. I thought I'm dying. But they told me you had a hemorrhagic stroke, which basically meant that my brain was bleeding. They didn't know yet the cause of it. We wouldn't know that for some time yet, but they said, but that's what happened. They showed me the images of my brain that they took from this machine, the CT scan, and you could literally see my brain with like a whole thing of blood. It was nuts to see. You could see the blood coming out. It was a significant amount. And they said the left side of your brain is bleeding, which means because it's the left side, they said that means your right side's going to be affected, which made sense because that's when I realized the right side of my body is what shut down. My left side was still fine. I could feel my leg, my hand could move, but the right side was just gone. And I said, well, or I think my mother-in-law, someone asked, well, what's the next step? And they said, well, right now it's a waiting game. They said, we have to see if the blood is going to stay and decrease or if it's going to expand. If it expands, I mean, and this is what was scary was they basically said, I mean, they didn't know yet if I could be paralyzed the rest of my life. It's just a waiting game to see how does the brain respond. It's also when I found out that my blood pressure was 220 over 180, which anyone out there hearing this who knows about blood pressure is terrifying levels. I mean, normal is considered 120 over 80. 120, I was 220 over 180, which literally puts me right in the realm of stroke victims, heart attack victims. People die at those numbers. The doctor told me it's a blessing you didn't fall asleep, whether on my bed or in the car, because they said you easily could have died. I easily would have died within a half hour to an hour. I could have been dead had I not gotten this scene already. So, I mean, in other words, we reacted perfectly. I mean, to get to the hospital and all that, but it was pretty scary for a while there because I'm just laying there and not, you have to wait. It's just a waiting game. I mean, they had me hooked up to all these things but and the other issue too being is that they had to still we had to do all these tests because we had to find out, are there any issues with my heart? Did that affect it? Is it blood pressure? Is that what caused it? Is it something with my brain that caused it? I mean, I potentially could be looking at either heart surgery or brain surgery. It's like nothing was known immediately just yet. But as the hours went on, now, so by this point, now we're on to the 22nd, because this is the Friday that I was in the full day. And as the hours went on, they were doing more and more tests, and they were starting to rule out certain things. Like my heart, they said, thank God, was fine. So your heart looks great. They then realized that the blood, by the grace of God, was starting to decrease. I mean, in other words, it didn't expand. So this was very good news. Regarding what my feeling, it was there's nothing they can say. It's just I don't know how to explain it. You have to see if your feeling comes back or if it doesn't. If it doesn't, it doesn't. You're just paralyzed. They had to schedule a physical therapist to eventually come see me. They told me we're gonna have someone because you may have to be doing weeks of physical therapy, possibly, or who knows? We don't really know at that point. So I'm just laying there, still slurring my words because I still have the droop. That's the reason I wasn't texting anyone. I just told. By that point, the other thing I should mention, Carol Ann was there because she did take an at-home COVID test. She came up negative, so by that point, she was able to come see me. And I just kind of told Carol Ann, just please keep everyone in the loop, keep texting people for me, because I just wasn't in a place, of course, to look at my phone and text, and I still had no feeling on the right side of my body. at all. And my words, I couldn't talk on the phone. I sounded slurred. I was nervous. I didn't know what to expect. I was resigned to God's will. I can truly say that to everyone hearing this. I thought to myself, if this is what God wants, it's what God wants for my life, and I will use it to glorify him. That was one thing I thought about in the hospital bed that day was, God, teach me how to use this to glorify you. If my quote unquote ministry days, meaning teaching, if that's over, then it's over, and I will glorify you however you want me to. Believe it or not, Nina, I actually thought to myself, one of the thoughts I had that day was, thank God Nina came in my life, and that we've been able for these past, 2 years plus to just talk about the faith and talk, help you with every question you've had and work on articles together, work on videos together. Because I thought, Nina is ready to just take this over. That's really what I was thinking. If I can't do this, then Nina is ready, and I'll help her.
If you told me that, I would have had a stroke too.
Yeah, I know, but it's weird because in that moment, I'm thinking, what am I going to do? Like, do I still do a podcast if I'm going to be on there with my face? I didn't really know what to think, and what if people can't understand me? I had no idea what to think. But I was just laying there, and this is when Carol Ann starts letting me know all these people are praying for you. She starts reading me back the text messages, the emails from people. It was amazing because she says at one point, all these people are praying for you, and all of a sudden, as she's reading me the text messages from others, it's the first time I realized I could feel my face. My face feeling came back, just laying there, and I thought, oh, I'm like, I could feel my face. And I still had a slight slur in my speech, but Caroline said, you sound better. So it's still a little slurred, but you sound a lot better. She's like, and your face looks better. I'm like, yeah, I can. I'm doing this. Like, I can feel me. I'm like, that's so weird. With my left hand, I'm feeling on the right side of my face. Then about maybe 10 minutes later, I said, oh, I feel my leg. And it went from numb to I could feel it. And I thought, oh, my leg's moving.
So I just have a question. So I remember when I got my wisdom teeth pulled, I got them taken out pretty late, and they struck, which they told me was a possibility. Like, they hit like a nerve, and for like months, like when I would tap my face, I literally like couldn't feel my fingers. Like, I just couldn't feel anything. Is that how it felt? Like, you just couldn't feel? Because I just know with me, like, I couldn't feel myself touching my face.
Yeah, that's a perfect description because I've had dental work like that too, and it is pretty much identical to what you're describing. I mean, in other words, you can my left hand, which I had feeling it, I'm touching the right side of my body down to my leg, and you just don't. There's nothing. I couldn't feel anything. It sounds you could have punched me on the face. I wouldn't have felt it at that point.
Yeah.
Doctors kept coming in and like trying to poke at me and like, do you feel anything? And I'm like, no, nothing. But when the feeling came back, first to my face, then to my leg, I told one of the nurses I can feel my leg, and I started kicking my leg up on the bed. I mean, I can move it. So she starts to feel my leg. Do you feel this? My face. Do you feel this? And I'm like, yeah, I can feel that. My right arm and my body still was completely done. Like, I mean, completely numb. I had no feeling. And then hours were passing by. So I kind of then thought, okay, well, at least I know I can start walking. I'll be able to walk, and my face, as the hours went on, Caroline said I was looking better and better. I said, okay, so it's just the right side of my arm I'm not going to have, which even then I thought was a blessing because I'm left-handed. I thought, this is a blessing. As I laid there in the hospital bed, I did a lot of reflection on, why does God have me here? Like, why would this happen? And like I've said for years, when something happens in life and you try to think in the moment, why is God letting this happen, or why is he allowing it to happen? Right? His passive will. He allowed this to happen to me. Sometimes we try to like rationalize it in the moment, and sometimes you don't know answers to things for years until hindsight hits, or sometimes not even until the next life. But sometimes in the moment you can start discerning certain things. And one of the things I thought about on the spiritual level was the fact that I had that thought in the car of like, I'm going to go to purgatory for a long time. So in the hospital bed, I thought, I really, really have to start working harder at my venial sins and my root vices that I wrestle with, because we all have them. That's our spiritual combat. It's like think it was St. Ignatius Loyola, said, there's no compromise. When it comes to mortal sin, he said, no compromise. Mortal sin is not in question. You can't commit mortal sin. He said the spiritual combat comes with our venial sins. Or at least it ought to be, right? And I lay there in the hospital bed thinking, okay, what is it that I wrestle that I have to work on? So I did a lot of deep thinking on that, a lot. The other thing being about being resigned to God's will, having to be a peaceful acceptance, a trustful surrender, that if this is what God wants, it's what God wants. Not saying that, again, just to clarify, not that God caused it, like God says, I'm going to make this happen to Joe, but it was the fact of but it happened, so God allowed it to happen. And if he allowed it, there must be a reason meant for my holiness and my good that I can gain from this somehow. So I did a lot of thinking on that. And then you have the practical side of things where I thought, okay, what got me in here? Practically speaking, well, I don't know how long, but almost every day of my life had become fast food for breakfast, for lunch, for dinner. Then I'm still hungry. I'm going to go get pasta. I used to binge on pasta, as you know. Spaghetti's my all-time favorite meal ever. But we're talking night after night after night, day after day. Just fast food, junk food, for my snacking all day, eating late at night, midnight, I got to eat again. I'm still hungry.
Was it just related to stress or convenience because you're just a busy person, or what do you think the root of that was?
That's a great question. I think it's both, 100, literally, because it is convenience. Being busy, having a lot to do, as you know, I mean, I did construction for years, right? And that was a busy industry, and it just becomes easy to just, when you're on the road, pull into this stop and that stop, just get your food, and and that kind of became a habit of mine to do. But stress also played a part because, as you know, and as some of you might know, without getting all into the details, but it's been a stressful couple of years for me and for Carolina. There's lots happened. So, and the funny thing is, I put on, I think, maybe a good show exteriorly. I don't often appear stressed. I think, but subconsciously it's there. It's physiological. The body knows when you're stressed. So even though I might appear, hey guys, I'm doing good, and laughing and telling jokes and all that stuff, but I mean, the reality is inside, I probably have a lot going on, which is also probably why, as you know, Nina, I was a horrendous insomniac. I couldn't sleep. I mean, I could be texting, let's say you and Jesse or whoever, like Brad, at 3 a.m, and then at 6 a.m, like, oh, good morning, everyone. Like, I couldn't sleep,
And everyone would be like, Joe, did you even go to sleep?
Yeah.
But yeah, but you have insomnia, and that's difficult. I have it too, but I think yours might even be worse than mine.
Yeah, imagine that for, several years, and horrible eating, stress, all just build up in the body. Trying to put on the show. I don't hate to say it that way, but it's like a facade. You're trying to put on the act of like, things are fine, we're fine, things are good, I'm doing good. It's a lot. And I think I had a lot going on that I wasn't dealing with. I wasn't talking enough about to people that care about me, that love me. And the fact that I was just eating horrendous. I went from, 1 cup of coffee a day to like, I'm having an energy drink in the morning. I'm gonna have coffee for my second afternoon break. I'm gonna have a cup of coffee when I get off work. So the caffeine's, dehydration, I'm not drinking water. I'm not working out, I'm not being healthy. So practically speaking, there were all these things built up, and so I don't forget, and smoking. As you guys, I smoke cigarettes. I've been smoking cigarettes for 25 years. And if I'm being honest with myself, 100% honest, I mean, when people used to ask me, well, how much do you smoke? And I said, well, a pack lasts me about 2 days. Well, that was probably true 2 or 3 years ago, but I know I had upped it in recent time. Again, probably because of stress, boredom, a whole mix of things. I was smoking a lot more. I was starting to get into like chain smoking, where like I would go outside, first thing I wake up, go outside in the morning, and 1 cigarette was enough. I'm having 2, 3, 4, 5, along with my coffee, then going in and working the first break, 6, 7, 8, 9, it's just, so all these things, I feel like all these things collided. And I think what tipped it over the top, this is just a theory of mine, but I don't know, I just wonder, is the fact that I did have COVID. That week I had COVID, I was battling with being sick. And I was taking medication that had a warning saying, don't, it basically could cause very high blood pressure. Be careful if you have a history of this, which I have. And I took it. I'm sure that skyrocketed things. I hadn't been taking blood pressure medication in about 3 or 4 years, which I should have been, but I just didn't. So a lot of things I feel just kind of like snowballed to that Thursday, and getting off work, and then bam, everything just kind of hit and collided. I was thinking about all this in the hospital. The last thing I really want to say about the hospital experience was the fact that I mentioned that my feeling came back to my face, my leg. It was later that evening. My Monsignor Sebastian, had emailed the whole chapel, and emailed all his people that he knows that belong to his order of priests, the other chapels across the world, even in Ireland. He was emailing.
Oh yeah, I think I got the email too, but I think I'm signed up. But I got the email. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And just telling everyone, like, we're gonna be praying a rosary for Joe at the chapel, and if you can't make it physically, then pray at your home, or just pray it at this time. And and Caroline told me that. Well, it's so crazy that hour, as I'm laying there, all of a sudden I said, "Oh my gosh!" I said, "I can feel my arm in my hand." And Caroline said, "Are you sure?" And I looked up my right hand and said, look, I'm moving my fingers. I feel this. And I picked up my cell phone. I could hold my cell phone like normal. And we called for the nurse. The nurse came in. I said, I can feel things. She's like, "Are you sure?" I said, "Can I walk?" She's okay. Let's take it easy. So she kind of lifted me out the bed, and she said, "Okay." And she was kind of behind me in case, but I started walking around normal. And she squeezed my hand, and yeah, she's like, "Here, squeeze my fist," and I'm like squeezing. She's like, "Okay, I feel that." She's like, "Wow, that's good." And everything came back, but she said, "Okay, we still have to do some tests, monitor your blood pressure." The following day, so this is my final day in the hospital, I'm laying there, and my blood pressure was still a little elevated. It was still a little high. And my doctor came in to see me, and she said, "Okay, we have two issues here." She said, "One, your blood pressure is still high. We want you to bring it down about 20 points. She said, "Secondly, you still need to do an MRI, but they're booked for another week." She said, "So you're probably going to stay in the hospital for a week."
And this was at Christmas time.
This is the day before Christmas Eve. Day before Christmas Eve. And she said, "So you're going to have to be here another few days." And then she looked at me and said, "Anything you want to share with me about what you're feeling right now?" And I just looked at her. I said, "Doctor," I said, "please, I can't be in this hospital for Christmas. I have to be home for Christmas with my family." She looks through the paperwork. She looks at the numbers, and she says, "You know what? Go home and enjoy Christmas with your family." And I said, "Really?" She said, "Yeah, go home and do that." She said, "But," she said, "you can do your MRI as an outpatient." She said, "But you got to get that blood pressure down 20 points before you can go home." Well, I was so happy that she said that within the hour, my blood pressure, it dropped. I was such in a good mood that it dropped, and I was like, "Oh, I got it to the number." And they said, "Okay, you're good to go." And, went home, celebrated Christmas Eve and Christmas with my family. And of course, that's the first time I think I responded to you, to give you my updates, being out of the hospital. I forget when I first responded to you.
I think you actually texted me. I texted you when I got the news, and like in the middle of like the night, so technically morning. You just texted me like praying hands.
Oh yeah,
but
I might have texted
you. Like it.
Yeah, I might have texted you maybe.
And you asked me to pray for you.
Yeah, I think
that wasn't that night. That was like the next.
Yeah, exactly. That was when I had full feeling come back.
Okay.
And I said, "Pray for me." And the thing is, I had a lot of anxiety. When I went home, the first week home was a lot of anxiety for me, because I kept thinking, every time I felt some kind of twitch in my face or something like but fuzzy in my arm, I just kept thinking it's going to happen again. I was so scrupulous about that coming back, like, just because it happened so fast. I didn't want to like stand up and walk too fast. All of a sudden, everything gets dizzy and the headache comes back, and I was just worried. I was told that stroke victims, once you've had a stroke, you have this higher percentage likelihood of getting it again, and so that was just on my mind. Kaiser, my hospital, gave me a whole different diet, obviously, where it was like, you got to watch out for your sodium, watch out for your sugar. I mean, everything changed. And of course, in the hospital, I thought I can't smoke anymore. Okay, I'm not doing that anymore. I'm not doing caffeine for some time. So, I mean, coming out was a challenge. It was hard, but the first couple of weeks were very difficult, and especially when you've smoked for 25 years, the withdrawals are hard. Tremendous. And it sounds, I don't know if it sounds silly to anybody, but food withdrawals are a thing too. I mean, when you've had a certain palate for years and no one's told you any different, I'm just doing my Taco Bell burritos and I'm doing my spaghetti for dinner and meatballs, and all of a sudden it's like, nope, can't do any of that anymore. you got to start eating this way, whole foods and fruits and veggies, and it's different. It's hard. And you know, ironically, I've lost a lot of weight, which is a blessing. But it's just a challenge, and there were nights where I was just like angry, like bitter because of withdrawals from nicotine. And why can't I just go and have a spaghetti? Like, it's little things that were just hitting me. Why can people eat whatever they want and I can't? I mean, stuff like that would get me. And it was hard. But now I'm monitoring my blood pressure every day. The first couple of weeks out of the hospital, I still had high numbers. And the doctors kind of prepped me on that. They did say your numbers gradually are going to start dropping if you do things correctly. You'll start seeing a gradual shift. And so the first couple of weeks, so I was in high range, and I was that made me nervous. I kept telling Caroline, why aren't they lower? I'm doing everything right. And she said, just be patient. But they did start to drop by week 3, week 4. Now I'm in the range of almost being normal, like consistently every day. And it's a blessing. The other great thing that's happened is being able to do spiritual direction with Monsignor Sebastian to discuss the things I mentioned about, I don't want to, the next time around when I'm preparing for death, I don't want to have to think, man, I'm heading to purgatory for a long time. I need to seriously, as you and I both have said for years, Nina, but it's like, I need to take seriously the charge of aiming for heaven with everything. As I say, aim for heaven, don't aim for purgatory. And I need to make that serious, and not take things so lightly or excuse things. But it's like, I got to take that very seriously. And the spiritual combat's a real thing, So lots of, that's been my past month. I'm going to be going back to work next week, which I'm grateful for. I'm in a good routine where I'm drinking lots of water. I'm eating healthy. I'm starting to go for jogs every day again, light spurts, and feeling good about things. And I'm now, I think it's 5 weeks or so, not smoking cigarettes. So, things are starting to do good. But anyways, that's kind of a nutshell of my past month. So, yeah.
Yeah, wow, you've definitely been through a lot. And I mean, I know you have done such a great job filling me in on everything. But for people that, they like your work, your apologetics, and have grown fond of you, when we put the news out there just so people would pray for you, but people were so alarmed, and everybody, was praying for you. Everyone wanted updates. So I just thought it would be a good idea to get you on and kind of fill everyone in on what happened, because I, had to field or, answer a lot of questions, but it's different coming from me than from you. Like, until, people can see you and hear your voice and know you're okay, there's so much to, people are still worried. So people have continued to pray for you, and it is really a miracle. And like you said earlier, sometimes we don't understand things till, it's like a hindsight thing.
Yeah.
And so it'll be very interesting, even just a year from now, what commentary you can add to this experience. Because it's a very traumatic experience. It's not to be downplayed at all. It's extremely traumatic. And to have to just, I mean, it's also like a personality thing. Like, there are some people that can just make lifestyle changes and do it cold turkey and there's no issues. And those are very disciplined people. But for like the normal person, those changes really can, throw you through a loop and disrupt everything. Cause a lot of, stress on top of the stress you're already experiencing, just having, a stroke alone.
Yeah.
So you've just been through a lot, and it's great to hear a recap of it. But other than, I guess, I know you told us your big takeaway was that you realized, like, you really need to start tackling your venial sin. And I have also taken that away from this experience. Like, I really need to do a better job working on my own. What would you say the other big takeaways are for you of having gone through this?
I feel that it's so, yeah, like you said, it's what makes the experience traumatic is because I I really thought I was dying that first night. I was convinced any second now I'm leaving, checking out, basically. I'm getting ready for judgment. And when you're at that point in life, I'm not saying that by any means it was this whole, like, my whole life flashed from my eyes, not like that. But I mean, like, but when you're at that point where you are convinced any second is it, I'm dying, you become, like I did, very heightened, very, very aware of what I've in the past called the eternal perspective, meaning we have to view events of our life from the perspective of God's eyes and from the vantage point of the cross, our Lord on the cross, and realize that nothing in this life happens by chance. God has everything laid out for a purpose, intended for our good and for our holiness. And this life is so short because, again, I'm thinking to myself, I'm dying and I'm only 42, which from one side of things, like, oh, you're an old guy now. But from another side, wow, you're still a young guy. You know what I mean? I'm 42 years old. And it's thinking to myself, how did I use these 42 years? How did I use my life to the best of the graces God gives me to glorify him, and to not let the things of this world become so predominant in the thinking. We get, as people, we can get so stressed out, right, over basic things, sometimes basic things. And we can get so fed up and irritable and caught off guard and over just, I don't know how else to say it. It's like things that are like, you're not going to remember this moment 5 years from now. Like, don't worry, it's just realizing our lives exist for something greater than the daily things we experience sometimes. That always ought to be before our eyes. The cross and heaven ought to always be in our view, so to speak. And I just had to remember that myself. I talk a lot about it, as people that know our podcast and our website know. I mean, we talk all about these things, but just like the cliche goes, I mean, it's easy to say, but it's hard to do. And I'm always telling people, please pray for me whenever I'm preaching or teaching or whatever, because just because I can teach on something, just because I mentally know a lot of things, because I've studied for years, doesn't automatically mean, oh man, Joe's just living this heavenly saintly life. It's like, well, I'm in spiritual combat like everyone else is. You can know the correct things, and yet still the struggle is real. And that's a lot of the takeaway I got from this was, I have to amp up my spiritual combat. My prayer life has to be much more serious. And just to do an honest admittance here on the podcast, praying the rosary. Something I talked to my Monsignor about in spiritual direction. I have to do a much better job of the meditations. I just have to work on that. It's easy for me to just pray, but my mind is everywhere else. I'm just thinking about whatever it could be, work, life, family. Oh, this weekend. Oh, so-and-so said that last weekend. Oh, I got to do this tomorrow. But you're praying the words. Okay, I did my rosary. I did my daily thing. I'm done. I need to be more generous and give more to Our Lady and to our Lord. It's what really hit me. I need to make just much more of an intentional act that way, to be more generous to our Lord on the cross, to Our Lady who loves me so much. I'm consecrated to her as her slave, to our Lord through her. And I need to give them the best of myself, not give them like, well, I'm so tired from the whole day. I've done all these things, so I'm giving you the best of what I have left, but give them first and foremost the best of everything. If that makes sense, keep heaven always in the mindset, because like we always say, you could die any minute. I mean, think about this, Nina. It's so funny how often the past 2+ years have you and I talked about end time stuff, Antichrist, what's going to happen? What do we think is, all these things, right? And yet here I am thinking, well, I'm going to die any second now. It's like, oh, I'm not going to live to see any of these things. This is what went through my head. I'm not even going to live to see what pans out, because it's now, it's today, it's happening. This is the end of my world is right now.
Right.
That thought tripped me out, because Monsignor has said for years to us in his homilies in the me and spiritual direction, he says, you can be all obsessed as you want about end of the world, but the reality is the end of your world could be today or tomorrow. And you have to be prepared for that. If you're not prepared for that, the rest of it is all superfluous and pointless. And I thought about that on the way to the hospital. I mean, like, man, I put a lot of, I've read lots of books and done lots of study on these topics, which I'm not saying is bad, but I thought, how much effort by grace have I put into being prepared for this could be the end of my life, like right now, because I'm about to go meet my judge.
Right.
You know? So that's been extremely real to me the past several weeks. And those thoughts have been exceedingly at the forefront of my mind and my heart, So that's the best I could say to that. So yeah.
Yeah, wow. Well, I mean, I know that you have spent a lot of time studying the faith, and you've said, how long have you been studying it now?
Um, wow. So
Like
we're going
really
now.
studying it.
Yeah, we're going on 24 years because it's 2024. I mean, I started studying in 2000, so 24 years ago, which is
And
crazy.
was that at the beginning of your you are a revert, right?
Yeah, I call myself a revert. You can't say convert because I was raised Catholic. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
I've always, in a sense, I've always been Catholic. I've had periods where I kind of could fall away or dabble into something else, but I mean, at the end of the day, I've always been Catholic. So that's why I say I'm a revert, because I kind of like fell away for a bit at early, one point in life, and then just had this major surge back into it, and that's kind of never left me since. So I'm a revert, but I mean, I was when I was raised in the family, like I always say on my mom's side, my mom was your traditional large Mexican Catholic family. My mom has 7 siblings, so it's a large family. And my grandma, and my grandpa raised them in the Catholic faith. They were raised in my grandparents were raised in the Catholic faith by their parents, and they had tons of siblings, and they were raised. So I mean, it's this whole lineage of this Mexican family that's just deep devotion to the child Jesus, and to Our Lady Guadalupe, and to I mean, just to the rosary prayers. They went to mass every Sunday. Most of my cousins all went to Catholic school, growing up, so with my uncles, my aunts. So on one end, I had that going for me. That's my mom's family, right? And I have vivid memories of going for drives with my grandparents. My grandma said, "Okay, we're going to turn off the radio and pray the rosary." My grandma loved the rosary. Could pray it so often, throughout multiple times throughout the day, like as easy as breathing. She just enjoyed genuinely praying the rosary. And most of the time when you're driving with my grandparents, there wasn't radio or there wasn't anything on because you're praying the rosary. And when she prayed the rosary, her intentions would be for every possible relative she knew and all these things. So I had that on one side. I was raised going to Catholic school, the whole, like, what is it, first grade, eighth grade, however they say. I went to Catholic school. So I had religion classes. We went to mass every Sunday. That's my mom's side. On my dad's side of the family, my dad specifically, like I've said before, my dad's a convert. He converted the year before I was born. So I always tell people, if anyone who's ever converted, that zeal you have when you convert. Like I know you know it, Nina. When you find the truth of Catholicism, you find the truth of the Eucharist, the truth of the sacraments. This is the church our Lord started. You just have fire in you. You just want the whole world to know, and you want to devour all that you can about the truth. That was my dad, and I was born a year later. So,
What did he convert from?
my dad's background, his family, it's like a mix of either, like you could say, atheism or non-practicing Jehovah's Witnesses.
Oh, wow, that's quite a blend.
Yeah, exactly, quite a blend. That was my dad's. My dad told me growing up, he just, spirituality, religion just wasn't part of his upbringing. It wasn't, just be a good person and do the best you can in life. Be good to people. And my dad was raised as a good person, and came from a good family, and I love that whole side of my family. But they're just, decent people, but the religion isn't anything to them. Like, again, a lot of them were Jehovah's Witnesses. A section of that, a lot of them were non-practicing Jehovah's Witnesses. A lot of them were just unbelievers, and that was my dad's upbringing. So my dad, when he met my mom and met the family, my mom's family, and he had his own conversion experience into the faith and converted in 1980. So I come a year later. So growing up, I have this large Mexican family. My dad has all the fire, the zeal of a convert. So he's like all into Our Lady. He was into Marian apparitions. I remember being a kid and my dad was like watching videotapes, VHS tapes, just really old school, on Marian apparitions. And we'd watch the movie Our Lady of Fatima, the original Warner Brothers film, Our Lady of Fatima, was one of my favorites growing up. And every Lent, we're going to watch the Ten Commandments with Charlton Heston. We're going to watch Jesus of Nazareth, and these were just standard. It was a standard fare in my home. And, during the Triduum, the house, no TV, no music. We're going to be in prayer. So, I can remember being a young kid. I mean, I want to say first, second, third grade. And like, I mean, I was very attuned to Our Lady of Fatima because my dad loved Our Lady of Fatima. He had a specific love for her. And so I knew the whole story. I knew about the miracle of the sun. I knew all about the seers, Lucia, Jacinta, Francisco. So, I mean, I was so into that apparition. I would talk to my friends about it. Like, I mean, I did book reports on Lady of Fatima, fourth, fifth, sixth grade, So I had all that from my dad's side. My dad loved going to daily mass when he could, which I loved because it was like, wow, this isn't even Sunday and we're coming here. Like, I just thought that was such a neat thing as a kid. My dad loved the rosary. My dad loved the miraculous medal. You know, all these things. So I had that going with me. So growing up, I had the Catholic experience. I mean, I thought when I was like in fifth grade, I remember thinking maybe I'll be a priest one day. I love religion class was my favorite class. I was the annoying kid in religion class, raising my hand at every question to like show that I knew the answer, that was me growing up. I mean, and I had that with me, but it's like I tell people, and it's the story you hear, the tale as old as time, basically, of getting into high school and becoming a teenager, becoming rebellious, and just that's what happened, just falling away, and all of a sudden now, why do I have to go to church? And not want to go to mass anymore, fighting with my parents every Sunday, going through things at home. Teenage years are crazy years, you know what I mean? And meeting friends, my circle of friends grew, and the friends that I met, they didn't have any religious background, and we're all into music. That was our scene, the music scene, going to concerts and playing in bands and, having girlfriends. And that all became priority to me. And religion's kind of fell by the wayside. All of a sudden now praying the rosary is boring. I don't want to do that. I don't want to, why you force me to go to church, and all you guys do is stand up and sit down. You don't even know why you're going. And I kind of went to that mode, and I was a bitter teenager. I don't know. It was so long. I don't know what was wrong with me back then, but I was like bitter. I was angry. I was rebellious, kind of a thing. And, I don't need religion in my life, and, that whole thing. And I remember dabbling into like, why I wanted to study world religions. I remember that being a big thing when I was 16 years old. Like I want to judge for myself what's true. So I wanted to study Buddhism and Hinduism and New Age. And I wanted to, expand myself out there and, all that kind of stuff. So I'm studying all those. I'm studying different types of philosophy and all that, and trying to make, figure out for myself what makes sense. The funny thing is, during those years, I tell people, when things really were going on in my life, like, I mean, hard things to deal with, at the end of the day, I would always find my way to an adoration chapel, a Eucharistic adoration chapel. My mom lived across the street from a Catholic church where there was an all-day adoration chapel. And there were times, sounds weird, I would ditch school when I was in high school. I would ditch school to go to the adoration chapel. It's not good that I was ditching, right? But I was going there to pray. So, I mean, I tell people, even when I fell away, I knew somewhere in the back of my mind and my heart, I need God in my life. And this is where God is. Like, I knew that. So I don't know what was, I was such a confused kid back then, didn't want to go to church, didn't want to pray, but yet here I am at the adoration chapel. I still have my conservative values about me. I was very, very pro-life. I was very vocal against abortion all through high school. So I had that about me. And the other thing too, is like I mentioned, I had this love for Our Lady of Fatima, right? The way I was raised. So even when I was falling away, I still knew in the back of my mind, but Our Lady of Fatima, like the miracle of the sun really happened. I've always been convinced of that. I never had an answer for that. I basically was being rebellious just for the sake of being rebellious is what it was.
Yeah.
And it was like, when you're trying to find excuses to leave the faith for whatever reason, it's to justify being immoral, and it's just like you're finding excuses just like not having to do with it. You know what I mean?
I remember when I was looking into Catholicism and I first heard about the miracle of the sun and Our Lady of Fatima, so many thoughts went through my mind, and it was just one of the big things that kept bringing me back to like Catholicism must be true. Catholicism must be true. Like this must all be true was because of Our Lady of Fatima and the miracle of the sun in Portugal. So like just like you said, it's just like one of those things that kind of just sits in the back of your head, and it's just like, well, this has to be the truth, and you can only ignore it for so long.
Yeah. It's true, and that became important to me when I had my reversion. When I reverted, Our Lady of Fatima was at the forefront of my thinking immediately. And again, and that's the importance of parents raising their kids in the faith, because I tell people, if my dad hadn't had that devotion, I certainly wouldn't have known anything about it. But that stayed with me all through those years, all through the crazy years of my teenage years, and going to parties and getting drunk and all, but I mean, waking up and thinking about, Our Lady of Fatima, really, that's a real thing. I can't dispute that. And ironically, what happened is when I was 18 years old, I was very lost at that point, going through things in my life and just depressed and angry. And I thought to myself, I need God back in my life. I need to find a way to do that. So I had an uncle and an aunt who were overseeing a music ministry choir at the local Novus Ordo church, it was the church I grew up in, the church of my family and all that stuff. And they were like, hey, we could use a drummer. And I just happened to be a drummer. And I thought, okay, I'll join because this will be my way to somehow connect to God. Plus, it'll force me to go to church every week. I won't have excuses because I'm drumming for the choir. I joined. That's where I met Carol Ann because she was singing. What's crazy is about maybe a month or two after meeting Carol Ann, somewhere right in that mix of meeting her, my dad and my godparents for my baptism and my confirmation, they were going to this Marian prayer conference about 40 minutes from where we lived. They used to go every year, and my stepmom was going, and all four of them were begging me to go with them. Like, just come with us for the weekend, and you got nothing else going on anyways. Just come with us and just feel it out, see what you think. And I'm just like, it sounds boring. I don't know if I want to go. And I'm like, all right, fine, I'll go. Because they were begging me, and plus I did say I want to get closer to God, so why not? What the heck? Let's try it out. So I went, and when I went, it was a life-changing experience for me. I met an evangelist there, well known. We've had him on our podcast before, Jesse Romero. He was just speaking legit on fire with passion for the Catholic faith, for Our Lady. He was just going on and on about our Lord started one church, and here I am for the past few years studying different religions, trying to be open-minded, and I'm trying to find my way back to God. But man, when he spoke, it was just with such authority that I was like, wow, like I've never met a Catholic so on fire before. Who knew someone?
And weren't you attending certain Protestant services as well at that time? Was it at that time?
I was because I forgot to. I'm happy you mentioned that because so when I said I got to find God, I got to get God back in my life, so I joined the church choir. But I didn't. Here's the thing: I didn't know enough about my faith at all to know the whole difference between Protestant, Catholic, non-denominational. I didn't know any. To me, it's like, well, we're all Christians, right? We're all Christians. Like I didn't know any difference. I really didn't. And so on one end, I joined the church choir. On another end, I had two friends of mine that went to high school with me, and they knew that I was trying to find God. Oh, why don't you come with us to our church? We have a great youth group and we do Bible studies, and they were non-denominationals, Protestants, and went to a local little thing where I lived. And so I started going there too. I was going to their youth Bible studies. So it's funny because it's like on one end, I'm learning Protestantism, and on the other, I'm drumming for the Catholic Church, but I didn't see any discrepancy at the time. I didn't know the difference.
That is Protestant in a sense, drumming for the Catholic Church. So maybe that's part of why you were confused. But
yeah, it's so funny. Like I just thought like, hey, I'm hanging out with these Christians, studying the Bible. Like that's just what went through my head. I thought it was just a positive thing. I'm trying to find God, and no one I want to say dissuaded me because they were just happy that I was trying to find God. Like I was trying to find my way back to our Lord, and so that was like, okay, good. He's not being crazy anymore, and all that kind of stuff. So, but when I went to this Marian prayer conference, I was talking to some of the speakers there. One of the speakers there had pulled me aside and said, I want you to know that when I was talking, now again, I don't know how true this is or not. I'm just sharing with you what this person told me 24 years ago. But this guy told me, I want you to know while I was talking, he said, a light shone down on you, and Our Lady made it known to me that she has a special hold on your life. And here's the thing. I was in a long line of people to meet this guy, to buy his book and get it signed. And not Jesse, this was someone different, but just to get the book signed and meet him. And as he's signing books, I'm in line with my parents and my godparents. He called me out from the line. He just looked up at me and pointed and said, hey, you, come up here. So it kind of caught everyone off guard and me off guard. And that's when he told me that. He's like, I want you to know that, and I was just like, wow. So going home from that experience, something new was inside of me. And again, I started thinking about Our Lady of Fatima now more seriously. Because I just realized, why have I been trying to run from this all these years when obviously the miracle of the sun happened, which in 1917, which proves Our Lady came to these 3 kids, which proves Our Lady is real, which proves the church is real. Like, it was all hitting me. And Jesse Romero, who the evangelist I mentioned, it turned out didn't live far from me at the time. So we'd exchanged contact information. And he said, yeah, if you want to come over for lunch or dinner and talk. And so I took advantage of that, and I started calling him up and, hey, can I come over? And we would just start talking the faith, you know. And like you said, at the time, I was still going to the non-denominational thing. In fact, the pastor there was, of all people, now he's, you know, globally known, but it was Francis Chan, ironically, you know. But
oh, I didn't even know that.
Yeah, he was the pastor at the time at this little gathering in Simi Valley called Cornerstone. It's funny because, again, I didn't know any difference. The first time I caught a difference was after my reversion. Let me tell you one quick funny story too. Shortly after I reverted, I thought to myself, man, I got to start reading the Bible. I want to read the whole Bible and study the Bible. So I got a Bible from home, and I'm gonna learn this whole thing. And then someone told me, well, you know what you got to do is study theology. I'm like, theology? I didn't, you know, don't know what that is. And so I went into a Protestant bookstore and said, you know, I told the guy working there, I said, hey, I need your best recommendation on a book that talks about theology. He said, oh, sure. And he gave me a book written by John Calvin. This book is great. Institutes of the Christian Religion. This
Did you read it?
I did. I didn't know any different. He's like, this is good theology. I'm like, wow, thank you. So here I'm saying John Calvin not know any better. But see, like I told you, I was also in contact with Jesse Romero, the Catholic event. So I went to his house once, and Jesse's like, oh, you know, what books you read on theology? On theology. I told Jesse, oh, I got a good one. This one's by John Calvin. And he has a whole book on theology. And Jesse's like, okay, Joe. He's like, let's start talking apologetics. So you don't want to be reading this stuff just yet. And so he's the one that tuned me into Catholic stuff, you know, and all that. So I learned a lot from him initially. And then I was still on the non-denominational thing. Well, I went to one of them, and that's when they were doing baptisms one night. And one of the people they called up to this baptism, he got the mic to do a testimony. He was like, well, I was baptized as a baby, you know, the Catholic baptism, the fake baptism of the Catholics. But now I'm ready to claim the faith for myself. And that's when I realized, wait a second, like, okay, we have some major differences here. Because now it's almost like he's knocking the faith. Yeah. So after that service, I went and talked. This wasn't Chan. This was one of the associate pastors. But I went and talked to the associate pastor and just said, like, hey, what are your thoughts on Catholicism? I said, because you realize that's the church Jesus started. Because this was, I'm starting to learn things, right? I said that he started this church. And so he starts talking about, oh, no, it's false. They invented purgatory, and they worship the, you know, Mary. They worship statues, and, you know, they believe this about the Pope. Yeah, and the thing is, I was so green, as they say, I was so new. I didn't know how to answer these things. I just thought in my mind, like, okay, he's giving me things I need to study, right? Like, I need to start learning my faith. But I did know 2 basic things. I said, well, I can tell you 2 things. Number one, the popes all trace back to Jesus. That's I knew that. I'd learned that by that point. I said, you can look at any encyclopedia, look up the word papacy, and you're going to see the names all trace back, unbroken line. I said, number 2, I know Our Lady of Fatima is real. And I don't, and then that wasn't some demonic deception. That's Mary that came to visit these kids, and that's the mother of our Lord. So you shouldn't disrespect her. So I knew that much. But that's the night I realized, okay, I can't come back here. I was starting to become alert to the fact that, okay, we have major disagreements, and I have to really hone in and learn my Catholic faith. I want to take it seriously, you know. And that's what I did. So, you know, Jesse at the time, because Jesse used to travel all the time. So Jesse kind of connected me to his younger brother, Johnny Romero, and we're still close to this day. And, you know, Johnny did local Bible studies at the time, and Jesse said, here, stick close to him. And I did. For about 2 years, I traveled up and down to different conferences and Bible studies with Johnny on the weekends and weeknights, and the drives are great because I could pick his brain on anything. The guy knew so much about Catholic apologetics, and he himself, along with Jesse, were both converts to the faith, you know. So he knew all the objections. And I remember hanging out with him, like, well, what do you say if someone says we're worshiping Mary? You know, and he would start telling me things. And I would write down notes in the car as he's talking and driving. I'm like taking down notes and going home at night and looking at the Bible verses and highlighting them. Meanwhile, I'm like studying the whole Bible, right? I'm going through catechisms. I'm reading Aquinas. I start studying the early church fathers, because that was the word I had heard, early church fathers. Who are the early church fathers? Oh, these are all the saints of the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th century. Some of these guys knew the apostles directly, and we have their letters. I'm like, are you serious? Like, that was mind blowing to me. Yeah, right. Like, Ignatius Loyola and all. It's like we have. I mean,
I had never heard about them, just like you had never ever heard
yeah,
about them.
Ignatius of Antioch and Justin Martyr and Clement of Rome and Irenaeus. And it's like we have letters of these martyrs. These are martyrs for the faith, and some of these people knew the apostles. Some of these people were ordained by the apostles. I'm like, wow. So then I jumped into those things. And once you get hooked on the church fathers, you're talking years of study because you're going through the whole early patristic era. Then you're getting into like the era of the Council of Nicaea, and you're reading all of those fathers. Then you hit Augustine and St. Jerome and St. John Chrysostom, and now you're into the deep thinkers. And it just, I mean, so anyways, that was like my first couple years of the reversion, was just studying, sponging off of apologists. I got really into like apologetics. I'm, buying all the books I can, Scott Hahn, all the classic stuff, going to any conference I could get I could find out about, go to conferences and hear, Scott Hahn's talking, Tim Staples is talking, Jeff Cavins is talking, and all, Ken Hensley and all these people at the time that were just rised up in the apologetics world. And I just sponged. I took notes everywhere. I cross-referenced everything that was ever said, and Father Mitch Pacwa, he was, what a brilliant mind. And I learned a lot in those 2 years, sufficiently enough to where I could start debating, in a sense, like why, more people come talk to me, Catholicism is false. I'm like, oh no, it's not. I could start telling them why, and all that stuff. And it was a fun time because even my parents were so excited. My grandparents were really just over the moon. My grandpa was so excited. My grandpa Ray, I remember he came having me come over to the house one night, like, okay, mijo, teach me everything you know. And he's taking notes, and he's like, we get Mormons that come here, and I want to tell them why they're wrong and why we're right. So I like say things to him, and he's taking notes, and anyways, that was like, that was the initial, like we said, the fire, the zeal, the fire of a convert or a revert. That was me those first couple of years. But yeah, and then it all, of course, started. It's weird how by 2003, by that time, I got engaged to Carol Ann. She literally graduated high school, and bam, I proposed like immediately. Like I thought, God wants us together. I'm not going to risk losing her. We gotta get married. And she said yes. We were both super young, but we both knew one thing that no one could ever tell us back then. We had all the families worried about how young we were, and both of us like, hey, if this is what God called together, it's what He called together. And we knew that. We thought we don't need to date other people or travel the world, or this is what God wants. That's just the way it is. And so we got engaged. And of course, we initially were engaged to get married at our Novus Ordo church because it's the church she grew up in, I grew up in, both our families grew up in, both went to school there. I mean, that's what we thought. This will be the perfect story. We're gonna get married here. But this is also an era where I'll just say this: when people ask me, "How'd you first discover traditional Catholicism?" Right? Because before I didn't know what that even was. I didn't know that there was a Latin Mass. What's funny? In movies like even Our Lady of Fatima, in older Hollywood films, whenever they talk about Catholicism, you'll see flashes of the Latin Mass in older Hollywood films, right? I used to think to myself, though, that must have been, I don't know, centuries ago, or some ancient practice somewhere in Rome. Or I thought the Novus Ordo, the English, what we see, priest facing us, so I thought that this is the Mass it's always been. This is what I thought. It's always been that way. In America, it's always been that way. Like, I didn't know any different, no idea. But I remember going to adoration one time, a Eucharistic adoration chapel, and there was a little table before you walk in where people could just like leave prayer cards and booklets and all that kind of stuff. And someone had left a stack of booklets, or two in particular, one by Michael Davies, one by John Benari, and they were both regarding liturgical abuse and the history of the Tridentine Latin Mass. And I remember reading those, and it was eye-opening for me. I was like, wow, I didn't realize Novus Ordo was so recent, 1969, 1970. I thought, that's crazy. That's like the era, the decade before I was born, basically. I'm like, that's weird. And I started reading about, the Freemasons wanting to infiltrate, and this wasn't some conspiracy theory, and that's what people don't understand. I'm like, popes were talking about this. Popes wrote encyclicals about this back in the day. Like, so this was all like stuff I was studying on the side. Meanwhile, I'm we're doing marriage preparation with the Novus Ordo, but this is also when I started seeing the Novus Ordo. I was starting to learn about progressivism and liturgical abuses and liberalism, and realizing that the church wasn't as I I don't know how to describe it. Like, we all didn't hold hands in kumbaya. There's these major divisions happening that I didn't realize initially. The first 2 years was just like they say the what do they call it? The honeymoon effect, being a Catholic. Everything's so beautiful. It's so exciting. I'm a Catholic and we're the true church and it's so great. And, then you start to realize that there's people in the church that, they think different. And it's weird because I wanted to become part of a youth group at one point at our local Noah Bordeaux. And they were like, well, if we let you come in, they said, what would you want to bring to our leadership group? And I said, we got to talk apologetics. We got to instruct these teens on we're the true church and why they need to avoid protestantism. And at the time, the leadership was like, well, we're not really into that kind of stuff. We don't want to do that. And it was more just about what I perceive to be liberal things, and God loves all of us, and God doesn't want us to fight and argue. And I'm just like, what? So I was starting to see that in the church, but then it's like you start meeting Catholics who are like, well, we don't see a problem with birth control. We don't see a problem with abortion, and we think women should be priests. And like, wait, do Catholics really, they're Catholic think this way? It was like crazy to me that this was such a big thing.
Well, you know what I was going to ask you? I just didn't want to cut you off and make you lose that train of thought. And I hope this doesn't cause you to lose your train of thought. But like a minute ago, you had said when you first came in, it's the honeymoon phase and everything's so beautiful and you're just so excited to be Catholic, which I totally went through the same thing. But then you start to realize there's some differences here, right? Like we're all supposed to be one, but then there's this, this new mass, and a lot of the people that happen to attend it hold to things that aren't Catholic. And then that's how you discovered traditionalism. And I guess I actually have a question. And my question is, when people talk about traditional Catholics and then they're like, well, there's all these like mad trads or rad trads or whatever people want to label traditionalists that, have some sanity left. I guess what I'm asking is how come we're not just Catholic? Like what is the name for, all of these other people that are holding to novelties? I guess it's just like, well, now we have to identify as traditional Catholics when really I'm just a Catholic. And really what's happened is people have taken on novelties like modernism, right? So
Yeah.
do we identify as a traditional Catholic just to set ourselves aside from that? I guess it's just a question.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I mean, I'll share with you in honesty my thought on it. I've been through, I don't want to say it's a phase, I don't want to say it that way, but I've been through times in my life where, just as you described, I kind of became tired with the whole thing of like, well, I'm traditional, but you're this, and I was like, same thing. I'm just a Catholic. That's why I'm a Catholic, right? I'm a Catholic Christian. That's what I'm going to call myself. It's hard because I have been through that, but then in my experience, at least is what I could say, just in my experience, it almost like it brings more confusion. The reason why it's specific to the times we're living in, at least for me, because the reality is when we talk about modernism, right? Modernism has not just now seeped in, but it has corrupted a whole sector of people, meaning the vast majority do not realize that they hold to modernist ideas, right? They really don't. They are convinced we're just faithful to what the church believes and has always believed. I mean, it's crazy. Modernism for Masonry was successful in that sense of infiltrating and get its ideas out there, because the vast majority, whether hierarchy or laity, do not realize how compromised they are. But we're talking the vast majority. So now, here comes in Janine Leone or Joe Moreaux into that bubble and says, well, hey, I'm just a Catholic. And what the most think, oh, okay, you're just like us then. Well, no, I'm not. I hold to this. Is not okay. You're a traditionalist then. It almost becomes convenient, I guess is the easy way to say it, to just say, okay, yeah, I'm a traditional Catholic, because when you say that, it quickly identifies you to others. Okay, so that means you hold to these things, rather than having to like almost, not to say reinvent the wheel, but having to start from scratch every single conversation. Well, I'm just a Catholic. Oh, so you believe this? Well, no, I don't believe that because that's modern. I don't believe that. I don't believe that. And then you just confuse people. That's Daisy. Can you hear Daisy barking?
Hi, Daisy. Daisy.
He's mad because Spirit's, my cat's antagonizing her. But
yeah,
that's
I get what you're saying. Thought. I totally get what you're saying, and that's why I've always, distinguished it as well. The problem now that I'm seeing, then we can get back to what you're saying, is the problem now that I'm seeing is that basically there's tons of Catholics that are, identifying as traditionalists or traditional Catholics, but they're not, they may attend a Latin mass, but there's still quite a difference. It's almost like the name has been hijacked in a sense. So
it's hard.
That's why I guess it's like, and I know that even like Pope Pius X was like, the friends, of the church are the traditionalists. So it's not like a new term. But I guess that it's just like, in a sense, well, it just seems like it's isolating in a sense, which I get because you're holding to the truth, but really Catholics like have always held to tradition. So it's like 500 years ago would have people had to have said, well, I'm a traditional Catholic. They probably would have just said, I'm Catholic, right?
I'm Catholic. And
so this is like a newer thing where you had to identify, like you had to be able to distinguish it, I guess is what I'm getting at.
It's hard. And, I hate to say it, and I know that you know this, but it's one of the after effects of being being in a crisis.
Right.
It's just sad, but a lot of it depends on who your audience is. Like if I'm talking to someone that I know is Novus Ordo, for example, okay, I mean they're pro Vatican II, pro Novus Ordo, most likely pro John Paul II, pro Benedict, right? Most likely, because the average Novus Ordo people I know, the average ones I know, are suspicious or have issues with Francis by himself, but they love Benedict, they love John Paul II, right? But if I'm talking to that person, I don't have an issue saying, okay, well, I'm a traditional Catholic, because I know when I say that tells them a lot about me already. Okay, so you have issues with the council, you can go to a Latin mass, so it kind of covers certain things, and then the discussion can go wherever they want to direct it, right? But if I'm talking to another person who goes to a Latin mass, this is where like what you just said comes up, the issue of, because it's true, the word tradition does not mean what it meant even just 20 years ago. I don't think so. It meant when I first found tradition, which we're talking 2003, so we're talking 21 years ago. I can tell you from my experience, it meant something different, or at least my understanding, it was different. It continues to get warped and warped and warped, in other words. If I'm talking to someone else who goes to a Latin mass, as you know, it's so much even more nuanced, because then you don't sound like a traditional Catholic, right? Because you're both going to say we're both traditional Catholics. Now it's like, well, what kind of traditional Catholic are you? It's so confusing, right? Oh, I'm an FSSP one. Oh, I'm an SSPX one. Oh, I'm a Saint Consul. It's like all of a sudden now it's even more cliquish. You have your more different things and what that does is tell people, where do you stand specifically on issues like John Paul II, on Benedict, Vatican II, the Novus Ordo. Can you go to Novus Ordo? Can you not go to Novus Ordo? Is it valid? Is it illicit? Now you're getting to all the intricate sub conversations. Whereas if you're talking to a Novus Ordo person, Sam traditional basically means, oh, okay, so you enjoy the Latin Mass. They kind of get an idea, kind of things. But I will say a good definition that people ought to go by is, and I've been saying this book before, The Great Facade by Chris Ferrara and Thomas Woods. This book is not read enough. It's a great book. I know a lot of people that today the buzz book of the modern day is Taylor Marshall's Infiltration, which is a great book. And I tell people, yeah, definitely read it. It's a good book. But people, I tell them, don't forget, 20 years ago, there was a book called The Great Facade that was at that time very groundbreaking, especially if you were in the traditionalist movement or studying the traditionalist movement. It was a groundbreaking book at the time. It's so good. And Chris Ferrara, in that book, he says that his definition of, he says, this is how I define traditionalism. It's being a Catholic that wants to believe and worship as every Catholic did prior to 1965. Mm-hmm. I thought that's a great definition, because that's the truth. We just want to believe and worship like Catholics did before Vatican II, before Novus Ordo. That's it. Because they believe and worship different now, right? So that's a good definition. But yeah, it's true. When you're talking to other people nowadays that also go to a Latin Mass, now it's like the conversation has to, of necessity, be even more nuanced, because the traditionalist movement is now starting to have its own little infiltration coming in. I hate to say it, but I didn't even catch this until first meeting you in the past 2 years. I didn't, and so I'm still learning things about the crisis, you know what I mean? But now there's cracks coming in, and dividing lines are starting to be even more and more known. And that's just the reality of things. Every time, for example, nowadays, when Francis says or does something crazy or novel, we start seeing even more so that line get more and more noticed. So it just depends on the audience. If you're talking to someone who's known as Ordo, sometimes it suffices to just say I'm traditional because they, in a sense, have an idea of what that means. But if you're talking to someone else who also has a preference for Latin Mass, whatever that preference is, it might just be they just love the look of it, the aesthetics. But if they love the Latin Mass, now it's a bit more specific. What do you mean by traditionalist? Like, what does that mean to you? And then you have those conversations happen, where it gets more and more nuanced. That's the best way I can. But I just say again, that's still the easier route for me than to tell novice to go Catholic. So I'm just a Catholic because when I do that, they tend to get a certain view of me, like, oh, okay, so that means you're Novus Ordo, you're Vatican II, because that's what they think it means. And that's the majority. And so it's just easier for me to say the other term because that gives them an immediate insight into me.
Sure.
That's why. So, yeah.
So, yeah, I guess we'll have to backtrack a little bit. I knew if I asked that, it was going to turn into something where I was like, oh, I have to ask him, I have him on here, his thoughts on that, because it's something I've been thinking
it's
about.
Actually, it's perfect because, it goes right into what I was just getting into, which is how did I even find traditionalism, to begin with? Because, like I said, 3 years into my reversion, I just, I can tell you this. I did not know about SSPX and Latin Mass and I didn't, let me say this too. I didn't know if there was anyone had any issue with Vatican II. I had no idea that even existed initially. When I first reverted, my thing was as a new revert, I was so excited, right? I'm just like, I just want to learn everything the church teaches. Whatever she teaches, I want to learn. And if I disagree with it, then I want to change my thought and agree with her, right? That was it. So what do you think is the first thing I did after buying the Bible? What's the second thing I buy and read? It's John Paul II's Catechism. Because at the time, that was the book. That was it. Every Catholic I knew talked about it. You got to walk around with the Bible in one hand, catechism in the other. And when they say catechism, it's from John Paul II's catechism. Why? Because it was 1994. We're talking, 2000. This is 6 years before I reverted. This was the book. And it was revolutionary. First new catechism in 500 years since the Council of Trent, all updated to Vatican II. So when I first came in, I'm reading the new catechism. And I'm studying Vatican II because I'm thinking that's what the church believes. This is what the church teaches. And there were lots of things that didn't make sense to me. But I thought, well, I guess I'm wrong because the church says it. So you see how it's so confusing? The times
yeah.
Very confusing because I'm having to like try to convince myself about things that were common sense to me because this book here says different. This Pope says different. This council says different. And all the apologists I admire, they all say different. So I must be wrong when I think about these things, it's crazy. And so that was my thinking. Again, I didn't know anything different existed. No idea at all. I thought the Latin Mass was some ancient relic of the past. And that's just what I knew. I didn't know any different. I was all in when it came to the Novus Ordo. I was all in. I was like, I need to commit myself to this liturgy because this is the liturgy, and there's the Eucharist, right? And I give everything to this. So it's just where I was. But 2003, Caroline and I were engaged to get married, and I find these booklets at this chapel by Michael Davies and John Minari, which opened my eyes up to this quote unquote traditionalist movement, which was pro Latin Mass, which was questioning Vatican II. And I'm thinking, what the heck is this? But I'm reading it, and then I'm reading more because it's, it made sense to me what they were saying. So I started getting more books by these authors and like my authors. I'm just on the side, just reading it, not jumping to conclusions to see what they have to say. But meanwhile, what's happening at our own parish that we were engaged to be married at was we had, I won't say names, but and this priest since has passed away. So I pray for to his soul. But we had priests that were giving homilies saying things like, all the religions are God's children. And we aren't called to convert people because we're all his children. We're called to love. That's what we're called to do, to love others. And that's the message Jesus came to give us, And this is the kind of stuff we were hearing on Sundays. And I, of course, I was scandalized by it. I talked to friends of mine who were apologists to get their take on it. And they said, oh yeah, there's all these progressivists in the church and that's the real enemy. They're the ones not being faithful to Vatican II and John Paul II. Because Vatican II and John Paul II, doesn't agree with that. But of course, I'm thinking, well, why doesn't the Pope do something about it, right? Well, then I'm reading the traditionalist literature and reading, wait a second, they're kind of following the cue of John Paul II, because John Paul II did the Assisi Interfaith meeting. You see, that was, again, mind-blowing. And I learned this in 2003. What happened in 1986 and just happened the year prior in 2002 was he's calling all these religions to come to Assisi to pray for peace. And we're all going to pray to our gods. And the Buddhists, why don't you go ahead and have this chapel and put your Buddha on top of the tabernacle? And I'm thinking, wait a second. So it's not that this priest is being anti the Pope, and he's following the Pope's call, basically, is what he's doing.
Right. And Assisi's like the big thing that people refer to, if they even know that happened. But really, like, all you have to do is read most of what he says, and like basically you can find that pattern of thinking anywhere from John Paul II saying, may Saint John the Baptist bless Islam, or saying Protestants are basically saved in their own churches or sects, and different things like that, where you can see that is not lining up with 2,000 years of Catholic teaching.
Yeah. And again, at the time, this was all revolutionary to me. I read the Alta Vendita booklet by John Venari, where he reveals the documents of the Freemasons to infiltrate the church to the very highest point. And, I'm reading In the Murky Waters of Vatican II. I got that from Tradition in Action. So, I'm reading The Remnant. I'm reading all these, traditionalist literature and learning all this stuff. And almost like my world is kind of becoming shattered. Kind of what you experienced yourself. Your world starts to kind of shatter a bit. You don't know what to make of things initially, right? How could the church allow this to happen? How is this possible? That you're wondering all these things, and how much did this impact the council, if anything? Like, it's hard. And the other hard part is you get so many opinions from people. You don't know who to trust or believe initially, right? It's so hard. And
it is hard because you don't want to go against the church, and that's what you kind of feels like you're doing at first, or you're trying to discern, like, how do these two things coexist together? And they can't.
Very true.
What the answer is that they don't.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. And I can tell you at that age, in my early 20s, still new in my reversion in my studies, I lack the confidence and fortitude that I have today to have a firm position. I was very much about who do I trust that can give me an answer that makes sense for me? Like, I didn't know what to think myself. I was very confused. And then I went through this denial, like, I'm just going to focus on apologetics. That's the safer route. I'm just going to avoid all this right now, this drama going on over here. And I went through a whole bunch of things. But when I heard that homily that one Sunday where the priest was like, we're all God's children and doesn't want us to convert. He wants us all to love. We're all on our different path to heaven. And I'm hearing people tell me, well, yeah, they're progressive. They're anti the Pope, anti the Council. And then I thought, well, no, they're taking what John Paul II said literally, because he did Assisi. Okay, so they're right in line with him. And when you study Assisi, what did John Paul II use as his backing to do such a thing? Well, he quoted Vatican II, Nostra Aetate. So I'm thinking, like, there's this connection here between this quote-unquote progressive heretical priest and then the Pope and the Council. And so that's what I'm starting to see. So one night, just months before our wedding, I thought, I've never ever been to a Latin mass, but maybe it's time I experience it. Because I'm kind of, when that homily happened, I told Carolina, we're not gonna put up with this. This is false. This is what he's saying is wrong, kind of a thing. I went to the Yellow Pages, old school, because back then there was no Google and no Google Maps, or none of that existed. So I don't think I had a cell phone yet, but I pulled out the big Yellow Pages book and went to Catholicism under C. And then from there, I go to this. They actually had a section for traditional Catholicism. So I went to that one.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And there was like 3 churches listed, 3 like little entries. And one just happened to be in the city I lived in. That was 5 minutes from me. And I thought, oh, there it is. Right. So I called that number. The priest answered. Very holy man of God, Father Dominic Radecki. And but anyways, he answered, and he says, "Hello, how can I help you? This is Queen of Angels." I said, "Hey," and so I kind of introduced myself. I said, I'm engaged to get married. I don't know if it's right that I get married to this church because all these things are happening. I'm learning all this stuff, and I just said, "Look, I'm very confused. I don't know what to make of all these things. There's all these issues in the church. I don't know what to make of it." But I said, "But I just need someone that can kind of walk me through it, and I want to experience a Latin Mass. He said, absolutely. He said, well, are you busy right now? And I said, well, no. And it was like 8:00 at night. And I said, well, no, I'm free. He's like, why don't you drive on down? Come on over and knock on the side door and we'll talk. I said, okay. So I drove the 5 minutes, knocked on the door. He let me in. We talked till I want to say 4 a.m. I mean,
Wow.
4 a.m. And he's showing me all the, and it turned out he was a notable author of traditionalist movement. So he's showing me what he's written in his books, and we're going through all these different things, and he's telling me about all this stuff. And all I can do to tell you is this. I had never heard the term state of Acontis before, didn't even know what that was. That was a new one for me. But he tells me at the end of the whole thing, he says, okay, Joe, so basically what I'm trying to tell you is this. He said, the reason why there's all this confusion and you're seeing all these crazy things happen, he said, I'll tell you why, because we haven't had a valid pope since 1958. There's no pope. That's why. And he had just given me hours of information that it all made sense to me. And I just thought, wow, I said, I can't believe how do people not know this? This is crazy. We have to tell people this. And he's like, exactly, we do. But he's like, people don't want to listen, right? I'll tell you that night, like this, all of a sudden I was state of Acontis. Like it just, the whole thing made sense to me. I thought, this is it. This puts all the pieces of the puzzle together. There's been no valid pope. The council's fake. The liturgy's fake. All of it, all these things. I went home and I called Carol Ann up early morning. I said, all right. I said, I told her I met this priest. I said, okay, this is it. There's no real pope anymore. So we're going to this chapel to get married. So I switched everything on a dime that day. That priest got to meet Carol Ann, got to, know me better. And so, yeah, well, I'll definitely, he felt we were ready for marriage. We got married there. And I'd say, thank God we did. It was a beautiful Latin Mass liturgy by a very holy priest. But he married us. My family and her family were so confused. We're like, what the heck is going on here? Like this little chapel. We never heard of this church before. The diocese doesn't know what this is, right? And this guy's doing a Latin Mass. The Latin Mass is the old one. What is he doing? And so they had a bunch of questions. Well, I was all of a sudden now I felt very confident and very just dogmatic. I'm telling my whole family, I'm telling my friends, this whole thing, there's a fake pope. They're all anti-popes or this or that. There's been no pope. You got to start coming here. And I was on fire because I just thought he made everything make sense for me. It all made sense to me. And that's what it is. And I was like, again, the zeal of a quote unquote convert now to this movement of, this is the reality. This is the thing. And if you're going to this or that or this year, that's false, it's wrong. And, I was just very gung ho about it. And so then what I started doing some months into it, because now I'm studying everything I can about state of Acontism, I started contacting my old friends that were apologists and said, you want to debate the issue? We'll debate the issue. We'll do a public debate. I can debate you on this right now. I was like really into it, very much into it. And started to, meet up with a lot of notable state of Acontists and following their stuff and all this kind of thing. But I'm trying to think of, where to go with all this, other than I became, when I tell people I understand state of Acontism because I was there, I mean it. I was there and I was all in, and I lived and died and breathed this movement, this way of thinking, this way of seeing things. And I still have, you can't see it's my background's blurry, but in my bookshelf, I still have a lot of those books from back in the day that are now out of print, state of Acontis authors. I sponged this stuff, and I firmly believe it is my job and purpose in this life to convince this to all my friends, my family, people I knew at the sort of church. I got to convince everyone that this is the reality of things, and I went full in. I was challenging people to debate me, and some of that was pride. To be very honest with you, the pride of I just want to show them that they're wrong. I can remember emailing Jesse Romero, of all people, the guy that helped me revert to begin with, emailing him saying, you're wrong, you're false, everything you believe in is false, and you don't believe me, I'll debate you on this. Let's do a public debate, And even Jesse was like, hey, it seems like you have some pride hitting there. And even my own priest, Father Dominic, said, Joe, are you sure this isn't rooted in pride? Everyone's kind of calming me down. It's not pride, it's the truth. I saw it growing to do, in other words. But I did that for I don't know how long, some significant time, a couple of years at least, where I was just very devoted to it, and it made sense to me. I by this point had not even read anything from Archbishop Lefebvre, right? I never went. So a lot of people go the SSPX route and then state of Acontism. I noticed I went opposite. I was state of Acontism all in. And so my introduction to Lefebvre was through a state of Acontis filter, which, he's also modernist. He compromised. Everyone that's not Saturday conscious is all compromise. It's kind of like hard, but that's what I was in. That's where I was at the time.
Yeah, the Lefebvre thing is tough because for modernists, he's a schismatic, but then for Sedes, he's a modernist, so it's like it's he couldn't really win, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, and the hard thing is I didn't give enough credit to Lefebvre, or the benefit of the doubt, in other words, to read about him through his own perspective and to realize how much he helped things when he did in the 70s and 80s, especially. It's so true. People that go to a Latin Mass today do owe a debt of gratitude to him because he did and sacrificed a lot and was persecuted a lot for it. But at the time, I didn't know any of that stuff. I'm just thinking like he's another compromiser. That's just, as a civic conscious, that's how you're trained. In other words, that's what you're led to see. I was diehard for that movement until I began emailing Robert Sungenis. That's where Sungenis comes in, because Sungenis was an apologist. He's also been a guest on our podcast, but he's an apologist who had kind of was in the mainstream of conservative apologetics crowd, but he had kind of become ousted a bit for some, views, I guess the easiest way to say it. He had certain views that definitely were more leaning towards traditionalism. He was very critical of Assisi, the interfaith meetings, and those types of things. And, he was critical of John Paul II's papacy and called out certain issues with the New Catechism. So he was kind of ostracized by the mainstream apologetics community, but he was a very sharp, smart apologist.
Oh, and
yes, I began emailing him. And initially I emailed him with the intention, not necessarily to debate him, but more of a curiosity of like thinking, this guy should know better. Why doesn't he think identical to how I think? He should know better. So I want to pick his brain a little bit. Hey, Mr. Sungenis, Dr. Sungenis, my name is Lida, and I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on Saturday consciousness? It's so obvious that this, and that. Why don't you think the same way that we do? And he ended up being back and forth for months and months and months. So we're talking like, it wasn't like every day a new response or every minute. It was kind of like I would email him and a week later he'd get back to me. Then I'd write him back to me, he'd write back, and we were doing a lot of point counterpoint. Like he would ask 10 things, then I would ask 10 things, and answering. So, but we did that for months. It was good. It allowed me a lot of patience to study and research, which was very good. But we went back and forth for a long time. He was very clear from the beginning why he wasn't Saturday contest, and it was some months into it that he had challenged Saturday contest and John Lane to a public debate. Really, in all reality, because of my prompting. Like you have to show your skills against the Saturday contest. Like maybe I'm not saying it correctly, maybe others say it better than I do, kind of thing, right? So John Lane at the time was a very known Saturday contest apologist. He's a lay person, but he was just very well known in the community. If you were Saturday contest, you knew John Lane. And I don't hear about him nearly as much today. When we have Saturday contests on Instagram and all that, most of them don't even know who John Lane is nowadays. But back then, if you were Saturday contest, you knew who he was, if that makes sense. And they debated publicly. It matters little to me on who people think won or didn't win. Okay. The thing that stuck out to me was there was a seed planted in the middle of the debate that made me start doubting my firm conviction on the Saturday contest conclusion, is the best I could say. And it was a point that was made about First Vatican Council of 1870, mentioning that Peter would have successors to the end of time. And that got to me because I thought, this is a council that we all agree to, and it's an infallible dogmatic council, but it says it right there, Peter and his successors till the end of the world, end of the age, end of the time. It's like, it's right there. That doesn't make sense given my position, because in my position, there have been no pope for X amount of years. Nowadays, we're now nearing 60 plus, years. And it's not just that there's been no pope, because if all you say, well, there's been no pope, right? The classic answer is, well, we're in an interregnum. That's why we're waiting for the next. But the deeper thing is, okay, but how do we get the next one? We don't have any mechanism anymore for a conclave. Every valid cardinal under Pius XII has died. So now we have no way to get a new pope. We're kind of like, almost like you shoot yourself in the foot. This is the part that messed with my head. If that's the case, we have no way to make sense of what Vatican Council saying of 1870. Like that seed was stuck in my head. So I knew people after the debate that were like, oh, Lane wiped the floor with St. Genis. Lane won that debate. And I'm just like, yeah. But in my mind, I'd be like, man, that was an interesting point. Like that was in my head. I then thought about Our Lady of Fatima, and because I had done studied the Third Secret for years, and I was a big devotee of Father Gruner. My dad raised me on Father Gruner's apostolate, and I just thought it's funny because the focus of the Third Secret is all about apostasy, and apostasy from the top. So that I see. Okay, we see apostasy all top down. But it's funny how in Marian apparitions you never have Our Lady come out and clearly say, therefore, there's going to be no pope for these years. Therefore, the papacy is going to cease for. You don't have her saying it that way. It's like
some people have claimed within the Third Secret of Fatima that it pertains to an anti-pope. Have you heard of this claim? And do you know anything about it?
Oh yeah. See, here's the thing though. With me, there are so many interpretations out there of like, well, this is what the Third Secret says, kind of thing. It's like a dime a dozen these days. But I tell people you have to go back. I'm trying to think what his name is. It's in my article, The Real Third Secret of Fatima. You have to go back to priests and theologians who studied Fatima for decades, interviewing the actual Sister Lucia, okay, before she died, and before the whole controversy of the new Sister Lucia, right? But you have to go back to these people and their interviews with people that actually read, we know for a fact, read the Third Secret. Not someone who claims a friend of a friend of a friend knows a priest whose cousin is a bishop who had a letter given to him that they say Lucia wrote it. That's what I often get off of the people. But there are bishops who read the actual Third Secret in Rome. They read it. And when you read their statements, and then you have people that compile these together, the focus is always specifically on apostasy. No mention of you're going to go decades without a pope. There's no even, the word antipope's not even used. It's just always apostasy. You're going to see a massive falling away from the faith. That's what you're going to see from the top down. And so that's why when I wrote my article, I quote that directly to say, like, this is the thrust of the Third Secret. Apostasy from the top down. Okay, this is from the testimony of people that actually read the Third Secret, like the actual handwritten letters of Sister Lucia on paper. You know what I mean? That started hitting me a lot. But then the deeper thing that happened talking with St. Genis was then, and this, I've talked about this before, but he brought up Pope Honorius, which it was funny because I had heard of Honorius before by Catholic apologists. And, the standard thought on Pope Honorius, 6th century Pope is, he basically allowed this heresy called Monophysite, the Monophysite heresy. He was a weak Pope who allowed this thing to spread. He didn't do better. That's like the common response you get about this Pope. But when you come to find, when you actually research the century Honorius lived, you find out that he wrote a letter to this heretic named Sergius, where he basically agreed with the heretic. And because of that, when he died, was called a heretic and condemned by 2 popes, Leo and Agatho, and then 3 successive ecumenical councils condemned him as a heretic alongside the heretic Sergius, the heretic Cyrus, the heretic. They even call him the heretic Honorius. And I thought it's weird. Here's a pope who's condemned as a heretic, and yet is still listed as a pope. The whole State of Conscious premise is if you're a heretic, that's it. You're not pope anymore. You're just done. Or proof you never were a pope.
Was his heresy public?
No, it wasn't public. So this wasn't,
because you just said it right, that the issue was that he just didn't condemn.
Yeah. No. Well, this is what some people say, but the issue
I've heard every version of this. I've heard it from the Sedative Conscious. I've heard it from the Resistance. I've heard it, and they're all like, it's all different. And I've never been able to nail down what actually happened because everyone gives a different account of what happened.
Well, the thing that I will say is the thing that everyone agrees with is that the heresy was found in a letter that Honorius wrote to this heretic named Sergius. It was a letter meant for Sergius, and all sides will agree to that. The letter, when it was discovered, was agreeing with the heresy. Now, what some conservative apologists try to do is they say, well, it's ambiguous. That's like a key word with people that, it's ambiguous. It could be seen in a positive way if you look at it this way. But the reality is he's agreeing with the heresy Okay. And thus, when it's found out by the magisterium that he agreed with this heresy, and that's why he didn't act stronger to shut the heresy down. That's why it was able to grow. Then you had two popes condemn him. Two popes, three councils in succession condemn him. Even using the words, we condemn, we anathematize the heretic Sergius, the heretic Cyrus, the heretic Honorius. They even mention him that way because of this. Now you have, like you said, people have all sorts of ways of how they interpret the data that's in front of them. Okay, like some will say, well, it was private, it wasn't public. Okay, it wasn't manifest. See that's great. Because I agree. For a pope to lose office, as the State of Conscience will say, okay, it can't just be that the pope one day said something false. There's more that goes into it. Okay, heresy is much more of an expansive word, and there has to be a lot of things. One thing's been the whole topic of is it manifest? Is it a public heresy? Is it pertinacious? Is it persistent? Okay, all these different things have to be factored in. And State of Contis, like the ones that I used to know back then, especially, it was almost like sometimes they were looking for any possible. The Pope said this, therefore there it is. There's the proof. He's not Pope because look, he said this. He said this over here. It's like it's a bit more than that though, and that was the issue when it came to Honorius. Was it's a personal letter, but the point of the fact is it shows he agreed with the heresy, and he was condemned as a heretic, anathematized as a heretic publicly by the church, by the magisterium. He was publicly anathematized for a personal heresy, but he was publicly anathematized. But the church never said, we now have proof he's a heretic, therefore that papacy never existed. They never said that. That was a key point to me at the time. They never said that papacy never. He was an anti-pope the whole time. We never knew, but it turns out he was. The civic conscience, the dogmatic assertions of the concept today kind of leads you to that way of thinking. We found this thing over here of this pope or that pope, therefore we know for certainty never a pope. That's why I tell people I'm not saying I'm 100% closed off to it. I'm just saying
right.
It's much more nuanced than a simple. We deal with Instagram trolls all the time. It's more nuanced than just jumping on a comment thread. I'll tell you what the issue is. The Pope's not the Pope. He's not a Pope. He's a false Pope. There it is. Bye. And it's like it's more than that. Nina, you there? You there, Nina? Nina. Can anyone on YouTube validate if they can hear me or see me? On my end, the stream got paused. Okay, so I see Nina's jumped off.